The night enveloped the airport in darkness. The plane, loaded to the brim with luggage and passengers, stood on the runway, ready to take off. At that moment, no one suspected that a terrible threat lurked in the dark and forgotten corner of the cargo hold. Inside the hold, where usually there was only hustle and bustle, hid the monster. It was huge and terrifying, a creature of nightmares, covered in sticky slime and perpetually craving new victims. Its tentacles, resembling cobwebs, pierced the darkness, exploring the space in search of prey. A man named Jake had been working as a baggage handler at the airport for several years. His daily routine consisted of moving suitcases and monitoring the cargo holds. But today, something dreadful awaited him. When Jake opened the door to one of the holds, he felt an unpleasant chill that enveloped his body. The pungent smell of vile slime made him pause for a moment. But it was too late. The massive body of the Pook enveloped him like a web and began to engulf him. Helplessly trying to escape, Jake realized that he had become a victim of this horrifying creature. His screams were swallowed by the darkness, and he was enveloped in a layer of slime, becoming part of the cocoon that remained in the cargo hold, unnoticed by the others. But Jake was just one of many. With each passing hour in flight, the Pook found new victims. Passengers and crew members, including pilots, became its prey, their cries drowned out by the roar of the engines, their bodies disappearing into the darkness of the hold. Time passed, and disaster seemed inevitable. The fate of the plane hung by a thread. Most of the instruments were damaged during the struggle with the Pook, and the airliner continued to float in the sky, dependent on autopilot. But among the passengers was one man who refused to give up without a fight. He was an elderly former military pilot whose skills and experience could be decisive in this situation. Captain Stevens, as this pilot was called, took responsibility for saving everyone on board. He gathered a group of surviving passengers and explained his plan of action. The first step was to isolate the Pook in the cargo hold to prevent further attacks. To achieve this, they used all available means: seatbelts, scraps of fabric, even luggage straps and backpacks. Forces united, and they closed off the Pook's access to the rest of the plane. Now that the Pook had been temporarily subdued, it was time to think about rescue. The airliner continued to fly in an unknown direction, and without navigation and communication with the ground, a safe landing seemed impossible. But Captain Stevens refused to give up. With his experience and knowledge, he called on everyone gathered to help him. They began to analyze the remaining instruments and maps they could find on board. Minutes turned into hours. Under the tense efforts of the survivors, led by Captain Stevens, they managed to restore some of the navigation systems and determine the approximate location. However, the further path was even more difficult. The airliner approached the ground, but the terrain below was completely unfamiliar. They were forced to land in a field covered with corn, far from civilization. The plane made a hard landing, its landing gear torn off by the impact. But thanks to the dense cornfield, the plane was able to skid through the vegetation and not break apart completely. After such a dramatic landing, the passengers rushed to evacuate from the dangerous aircraft as quickly as possible. Soon, residents from nearby villages, who had seen the huge machine land in the field, came to help and called for rescuers and military personnel to deal with this creature.